Hello, and welcome back to Parley, the show where you folks support the other stuff I make by paying me monthly to talk about the topic of your choice. This month, Vampir has requested some discussion on basically reusing the Jumpstart packs and what my experience has been about that. You said, don't have a set question for this month, so I'm trying to lean more into the personal podcast thing. Tell me more about your experience with Magic the Gathering Jumpstart. I ended up doing the thing you've done, buying 8 packs of Jumpstart and vampirbg's resealable boosters, and it's been a great time. I can bring the packs around essentially like a board game box. I think you've talked about changing the packs and putting in one of the modal spell land cards from Zendikar in each one. Can you go over your collection of those, even if you don't have any edits to the packs yet? Also, some talk on recent and upcoming Jumpstart products, depending on your level of interest and awareness. That'd be in the area of what I'm looking for this parlay. Sure, cool. I have some of those things and not others. You just want a podcasty thing talking about that Jumpstart thing. I have a lot to say. As a recap for what I have, I bought a booster box of Jumpstart for about $100 a couple of years ago, and I bought vampirbg's resealable plastic booster pack thingies to put those packs in. So what I did, and a bunch of sleeves that are all black. So what I did, getting ahead of myself, you want the sleeves, is I opened all the packs, but I never ever mixed them when they were open. We opened them and played with them as normal. And then after, playing with them, we would take our now sleeved cards and put all of the cards in the pack back in one of the reusable boosters. If you haven't played that much with Jumpstart, you should understand that because they're all single color packs, this is principally pretty easy. After you've taken your 2 packs, which are each only one color, so they have like all black cards and all swamps, and all red cards and all mountains, you shuffle them together and play. It's very easy to separate them because they're always all one color. We'll get back to that in just a sec. And then you put them in 2 packs. I chose to get vampirbg's resealable packs that are all the same, so you can't tell which pack is which. And then there's a big stockpile of them. So I have like 24, I think is how many are in the Jumpstart booster boxes. 24 of those packs sealed, ready to go. You could just open any 2, play with them, and then just sort them by color. It takes very little time, and put them back in the packs. And replay them as much as you want. Cool. What are the problems? First of all, the original Jumpstart did have one theme, one type of pack you could open that was every color instead of just one color. Rainbow, I think it was called. That for our purposes, that is a troublemaker. So if you get that one, unfortunately, I would say you have to eliminate that one. Probably you also want to buy another pack to replace it. It doesn't look like they've done that again in any of the supplemental products. So you can, and we'll talk about this a lot more a little later, you can just buy more Jumpstart products as they come out to add new packs to your collection. You don't necessarily need to kind of make up more yourself, although you could. You can kind of just every so often buy some and do something kind of cool, which is sort of play a half version of Jumpstart. So what I've been considering doing going from here is I've got a bunch of reusable packs, but what you can do is you want to buy some packs. It's fun to get some new packs. We just don't want to be forced to in order to play. You go to the store, you see some Jumpstart packs, get 2, get 4, and bring them back, get 2, and bring them back, give each player 1 and a reusable pack. Set up the Jumpstart pack once you open it for reusable packing, sleeve the cards and stuff, play, and then again, easily separate them and put them away. Another small advantage of this system is that it allows you a failsafe for one of the worst things about Jumpstart, in my opinion, which is if you get 2 packs of the same color. Now, it's okay if you get 2 packs of the same color, but a lot less interesting, in my opinion. It can create very, very linear decks. The complexity of Jumpstart's already turned down a bit. So having the option to just kind of re-roll your pack, if you were to get a reusable pack that matches the color of your new pack, you can just swap it back, re-roll that one for something that's a different color, is really nice. Like, I think that adds a lot. There would be an argument for sorting them by color, but that's kind of getting into like the value of these things. So I think the next thing I'd want to talk about, having established that sort of that status quo, that's where we are. At the moment, I can't show you any of mine physically. They happen to be at my folks' house. As I was moving in, I was way too busy to be playing with these, but my partner does play Magic a little bit, and I've got a couple friends in the area who play, so I will be using them. I just haven't taken them out in a little while. That's definitely not been my priority lately. But I have been interested in this lately because, as you say, there have been new Jumpstart products of more significance coming out in recent years. Again, we'll get back to that a little later. I think the next thing to say is that my feelings about Magic and my interest in playing Jumpstart has changed a lot over the past few years. So originally, a couple of years ago, I had begun to feel like I don't really want to be kind of bought into Magic anymore. It can be an expensive hobby, and I don't have the most money. I also just feel like they're kind of taking the game in a direction that isn't really making it more fun, and it becomes difficult to find a good cutoff point other than I'm currently having fun. But those new cards, I have some concerns, right? In the moment, you can probably say, oh yeah, like I don't know if I like that. I don't know if I like the direction that's going in, but any moment other than that, it becomes a slippery slope. So I said, I think I'm going to start trying to play Magic in a way, collect Magic cards in a way where I get things and then stop getting more things, basically. And one of the ways to do this is to enjoy the experience of playing limited by using Jumpstart packs. That was one of the things. The kind of four, I guess, pillars of that for me were a cube, so you can draft as much as you want without having to pay more money. The Jumpstart thing, so you can play limited or like more casual Magic. Also, I think rather well suited to a newer player. I'll get back to that later, without having to buy more packs. And I also think that Jumpstart, the reusable Jumpstart packs, do a good job of letting you buy a little bit more Magic if you want to. A trivially small amount, but still some new cards, which I personally think is kind of valuable. I'm not completely disinterested in the new Magic cards. I just want to control how much of them affect a gameplay experience I and my playgroup are already enjoying. Do you see what I mean? So that was important to me. I like that. And then the other two things are basically Commander and Tiny Leaders. Commander, it's going to take a lot of work. I've been digging into the collection of Commander decks I have. A refresher for people not familiar, I have about 16 complete Commander decks for my playgroup that all omit shuffling and also a few other mechanics, so as to make for a faster, smoother gameplay experience. But I would say I didn't really go far enough. I kind of feel like four-way Magic Commander, you need to do some extreme things to keep that flowing in a way that my playgroup and I like. We don't really like the games that sort of draw on or get battle cruisery, nor do we like the games where you kind of combo out quickly. And that's manageable. You can get a format like that. But I think it requires building decks in a very specific way. You have to kind of keep a mind to minimizing some things that you normally wouldn't think about that much. So I have had to kind of go back through those decks. You didn't really ask about this, so I'm not getting into it too much here. To eliminate things like, adding mechanics that I'm not sure are worth the mental real estate. So for example, I had added the initiative mechanic to each of my commander decks to which it applied because it's good value. And I thought, well, we have the monarch mechanic, a hot potato, and whoever takes it draws an extra card every turn until they take combat damage, and then it's stolen from them by whoever did the combat damage. I think that's fun. And so the initiative could be another fun thing to pass around the table. I'm not sure I'm going to get rid of that specific thing, but I might. We had already kind of fiddled with it a little. Technically, the initiative mechanic asks you to go to the Undercity dungeon, which includes shuffling, which we don't include in our decks. And this might seem very idiosyncratic. You might be thinking, why does it need to be so complicated? You kind of just don't like Magic at that point, right? I sort of disagree and sort of don't. I do feel like this is a game that sort of requires you to do the end of the development process. No one plays Magic with no format. There is no default format, to put it a different way. The products, the players agree there is no default format. So you have to decide how you want it to be a little bit. I don't think that's necessarily bad. I do personally think Magic goes a little far with that. You need to add a bit much, details to the experience to make it something fun. For example, Commander has had a long time problem with players telling each other what power level or what type of experience their deck is going to provide. You really can't trust people who are going to go for an experience that you don't want to just tell you that they are going to do that. Like, they probably don't know, and a few of them are maliciously interested in just not being upfront with you about that. Mostly people just don't know, which is the bigger problem. It's not that they're evil. If it was malicious, you could maybe detect that in their character, but a lot of people simply don't know, what power level it lines up with. So I do think that's a big problem. Having one person curate the decks, or having people work together to make all the decks in your commander pod is, I think, an interesting idea that would kind of violate what most people enjoy about Commander, which is making a deck that lets you express yourself a bit. Enter tiny leaders. And this might seem like it's not about Jumpstart, but it totally is. I think that that's a good way to get the thing that's missing, which is one-on-one, competitive, sideboarding enabled, express the hell out of yourself, make the sweatiest boy deck. I personally think that tiny leaders may be the most interesting form of Magic the Gathering gameplay for that in my playgroup. Again, this depends on a ton of factors. It depends exactly what rules you use for tiny leaders. It depends what kind of people you're playing with. It depends what experience you want. But for us, that is working very well so far. So at the moment, that's good. The commander thing is not that complete. It's sort of a work in progress. I have not begun the cube yet. And then Jumpstart is here with like an okay amount of progress. It allows the other part of the sort of two-player experience that my little set of Magic stuff is going to offer. If you're going to use the cube and draft, the idea would be that it would be with lots of people. I might design it for one-on-one drafting, but that's a whole other can of worms. I definitely think drafting with a larger group is a pretty unique Magic experience that I would like to preserve. I wouldn't want to make a cube that is designed explicitly only for, or maybe you could do 2 cubes, but it's a lot of work. I don't know. You get it. And so the Jumpstart packs. The question then becomes, for me, what are these for? What type of experience are these for? The bulk of your question is, what are you doing with them? Like, where are you in the process of including them in your Magic gameplay time? One of the things that I've come to is this idea I mentioned before of being able to include new product when you're interested, while easily being able to, the default is you opt out and nothing is behind. All the decks are sort of complete. They're fine. The packs are good to go. You don't have to add stuff. The default is not adding stuff, but if you want to, you can, and it's also not like a huge amount of work. You can just get some of the new Jumpstart product and you're good. You can buy, like 2 packs, and you're pretty unlikely to get overlap. That's important because a lot of the new Jumpstart product doesn't have a very big variety of different packs. So I do think it's much more important than we at first knew to be able to incorporate new packs in a way that doesn't involve buying a lot of packs. It seems like they're going to make a lot more Jumpstart that's like that, which I don't think is really good in general, but this way of using Jumpstart does kind of solve that problem. So that's appealing. More to say about that, but that's one thing. Another role, though, that Jumpstart has taken on is a relatively more casual experience. Do I want to modify the packs that much to make them how? Like what am I taking out and putting in? Something I've always thought about doing is taking out, the money cards. Like one in my original Jumpstart box, I opened a Craterhoof Behemoth, which is worth like half the box. So there's a way in which, I'm definitely selling that. It really doesn't need to be in that format, I don't think. We don't need it in our Commander pod, where that can just be sold. We got a Tiny Bones too, that can just be sold. That's fine. But there's a question when you add stuff about what type of experience this is meant to fulfill. I have a couple of folks in my playgroup that don't necessarily agree that Jumpstart is fun, basically. And so we've been talking about that back and forth, because it's okay if they don't enjoy it, but I really want to interrogate that as I'm putting so much work into this thing. What is it that I find fun about it? And if this is basically for board game things, then we could just play something else in that slot. to create whatever experience is meant to create. On the other hand, you could view this thing I'm doing as kind of a way to preserve my experience of Magic through the ages, as it were, which I do kind of feel. To me, it's kind of like I had a big experience with this game, but the version of it that I had a lot to say about is kind of being removed. And so I'm choosing to hold on to it, kind of buckle it down. And this is my version of it that I'm going to keep over here. And the other version can do whatever it wants. Very similar to how I feel about Dungeons and Dragons. If you haven't already, I would highly recommend that you make your own wiki for Dungeons and Dragons stuff that you're using, 5th edition stuff that you're using, because you may not like some of the changes they make in 1D&D, and there's really no issue whatsoever with that, as long as you have your own saved copy of all that stuff. If you have the books or use an online resource and you get a copy of it, something like that. We're not going to get into the legal discussion about that. I'm just saying wherever you use those resources, if you get a copy of them somehow, probably a lot of you, certainly I have some of the books like the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook, the Dungeon Master's Guide, I garbled that, then, it's probably fine. But for me, a lot of it is like small changes to a large variety of things that are hard to document, but it's easy if you just have your own wiki that has your version of the things. So for example, I think the spell Ceremony is kind of inappropriate for everything else in 5th edition. You could use it. It's not bad to use it. I'm sure some people, it plays a great role in their games. But from a game design perspective, I would argue it doesn't really belong in 5th edition. And I feel like it creates some incentives that at least my playgroup has found kind of annoying. We would be better off if it just didn't exist. So I'm just deleting it from existence. There's no more ceremony spell. Screw that. You can just roleplay that. It doesn't have to be a magical incentive to manipulate your personal life events to get a combat buff. That's weird. We're not doing that. You can if you want. That's fine, by the way. This is just an example. It's easier for me to give examples in 5th edition. What the heck is my problem with the magic thing, I guess it's hard. I feel like a lot of newer cards have a lot of wordiness or flexibility, mental load that they add that doesn't really improve the experience for any one person, but it benefits the product in some way. For example, there's a mechanic in the Brothers' War called Prototype. This mechanic lets you cast the creature for a different cost. Generally, the normal version will cost more mana and be all colorless, and the Prototype version will be less mana but include colored mana, and will yield a smaller creature. So you can choose to cast the Prototype version. There's a color demand. You get a smaller version of the creature, but it's less mana. Or you can cast the colorless, big, mass-produced version. The flavor, really cool, by the way. The idea that the Prototype was this specific thing and on a smaller scale, but then it got mass-produced and became a normal artifact with no color of mana involved. I think that's pretty cool from a flavor perspective. That's a fun idea for a mechanic. Now, my experience has been that basically what's happening here is that from a gameplay perspective, this allows them to make cards that are relevant in limited, usually as the colored side, and then are powerful constructed cards in the context where you can cast the Prototype version a lot, which just makes the card have more words on it when you probably aren't going to play it both ways in a lot of situations. You know what I mean? From a gameplay or design perspective, it basically just condenses two cards into one. I don't feel like it offers enough flexibility, enough of the time that it's sort of worth the mental load of making there be so much on the card. Now, I don't mind. I'm not a player that's really troubled by I keep saying mental load or like how much stuff is on the card. Like, I'm fine. But a lot of people in my playgroup don't feel that way, and I totally get it. It doesn't really make sense. A lot of the cards are not particularly mechanically remarkable. They are doing double duty. They're doing a lot of work in the product line as a whole, but for specific players, I don't personally have a very high opinion of that design. Again, it's just an example of something that, while on its own isn't a big deal, if you keep getting decisions like that, it makes for a product where you are having fun despite the product's design ideas, not because of the product's design, which is how I've begun to feel. It's getting to the point where it would be easier to make your own game than to kind of build craft Magic the Gathering into being something that I truly enjoy. I don't want to overreact about how bad that is. I'm just giving you an example of the mindset I'm in. When I started my Jumpstart thing, I wasn't really thinking that way. I wasn't really thinking like, well, this is going to be, this thing that I'm going to use to make my own version of Magic that will be good, where the normal version will be bad. And they also hadn't done as much to fiddle with Magic. There's a whole situation with the cards in the unsets becoming by default eternal format legal, which means that if you play Legacy and Pauper, you can't choose not to include those cards. Or before, you would choose to include them maybe, but probably not. Whereas now they're included by default. And so if any of them are any good, which like of course some of them are, that's how that works generally, you can't really not have that tone if you dislike the punny, silly tone of the unsets. And like stickers and all the weird mechanics in the unsets. Now, I'm personally kind of half-half with this. I can find those sets really fun. I just feel like it's pretty obviously bad to, by default, make that a thing that you cannot remove from the experience. Having them have a silver border or just by default not be included was the correct solution to that problem. Like, you could always just include them, but why do you have to force players to have that be a thing? If you understand the value of tone, Wizards of the Coast, you wouldn't do that. It just seems like a very weird... I mean, they did it for money. Like, that's why. That's the reason, of course. But I just feel like there's not really a need to discuss whether it's good that they made those cards by default legal in formats that sort of had a thing established, and you could always have just had fun playing Magic by casually brewing a deck for those formats with those cards. But why do you need to force players to include those cards? That just seems why. Like, that's not positive for the player. That's bad. And so lots of decisions like that make me feel like, again, I know this seems like a lot of complaining about something that just isn't that bad. Prototype cards are kind of cool. I kind of like them. I'm just saying that it's an example of the direction the game's design is going in that makes me want to have a system to avoid it when I play myself. I care a lot more about doing that than I did when I started making my little Jumpstart set. So, with all of that said, that means that I'm the kind of person who's interested in fiddling with the packs. But the question comes back to the thing I said at the beginning. How? For what type of experience? For me, I've explained earlier in this parlay that it's a little bit about it being a different experience than the other Magic things that my playgroup and I are sort of curating for ourselves. So I'm not looking for an experience like what I'd get from my cube that I'll make for drafting. Or like the Tiny Leaders thing, best of 3 with sideboarding, best of 1 with sideboarding, okay. Or the Commander thing. So not multiplayer, not highly competitive, might do some heavy lifting as a new player product. Do I want to add complexity to those? Is adding one of the modal spell land cards into each one good for my goals? I think it is. If you're not familiar, I think that adding those modal spell land cards is a gentle way to make the Jumpstart packs largely better. I think it's good because you can just take out the rare, which are often pretty misplaced, basically only in those packs, I feel, to create a sense of value or like opening a pack normally. They often they feel a bit jarring compared to the rest of the strategy. Again, I personally feel like Tiny Bones, Craterhoof Behemoth, like these are not cards that I feel like make that much sense in the Jumpstart environment. They're there because they increase the financial value of the product a lot, which that's just not something I'm interested in, of course, when I'm playing with them for fun. So for a lot of the Jumpstart packs, my point is there's at least one card that you would pretty much instantaneously remove, if you're me anyway, if you have this mindset, and then you could just slot in one of those modal dual-faced cards, and this will give your deck more land consistency without actually making there be less non-land cards. You'll have added a card that can be played as a land, so you upped the land count, if anything, but you didn't really fiddle with the mana balance that much. You kept it about the same. Another way to think of it is that because these will be played with another color generally, you have added the option to add a little more of one color if you need it. If your hand is full of green cards and you only have your green modal double-faced card, if it was just a creature, you'd be stuck, but this gives you the option to play it as a land of the color you need, which is kind of indirectly giving you a little mana fixing, is a way to think of it. I think that they would have a positive effect on the gameplay experience for a very, very small amount of mental work. However, at the time that those cards came out, I know this is like so many layers of a thing, but this is where I am. You asked for a podcast about this. At the time that those cards came out, like 2 years ago, Zendikar Rising was, if I remember, just coming out. And so we had those cards fresh in our minds, fresh out of packs, not that expensive. I, perhaps unwisely, didn't buy that many copies of those cards that I felt like were a turning point for Magic, because I hoped that in the future we would get more cards like that, but we didn't. Unfortunately, the way history has gone is that so far we haven't gotten more cards that are a land on one side and a spell on the other side. For a complicated variety of reasons, I'm sure, but the fact remains that we haven't gotten them. So a lot of the ones you'd want to use are somewhat expensive. I feel like it normally wouldn't be a big deal, but we're talking about buying a handful of them, right? Like not 4, more like 20. So it kind of matters if like Balaged Recovery is a green one, 3 mana, I believe an instant, but I don't remember. You can bring any card back from your graveyard to your hand, and the other side is a tapped forest, basically. It doesn't count as a forest, but whatever. I think is like $5. That sounds fine, but keep in mind that if it's like a collection of 20 to 30 of these packs, and all these cards are like $3 to $5, which they're not, but a lot of them are, you would need to pay like $100 to sort of retrofit your set of Jumpstart packs with that stuff. And you've made not that much of a difference. Like obviously it's still a good size difference because each deck of 40 cards is going to have 2 of these in them. So you are taking the land count from, 17 or whatever to 19 if it needs to be. It is a big difference. That's one of the reasons I thought this was an appealing approach. But the cost specifically has become a little obnoxious, in my opinion. I personally feel this is a place where I'm not really using them that much right now. I have other stuff in the set of Magic homebrew stuff to work on. They're kind of silly expensive right now for just some uncommons. What if they get reprinted? I should just wait and see if they get reprinted. I find it hard to believe they will never do those again. Now, something has just occurred to me as I've been talking to you about this, and that's how we'll finish up today. There is a thing called the Storm Scale. That is, the Storm Scale is a ranking of the likelihood that a given mechanic will be reprinted in any future standard legal set. Mechanics are ranked from 1, very likely, to 10, very unlikely. The scale is created and used by Mark Rosewater as his personal assessment and is not an official policy or guarantee. I have a lot of frustrations with Mark Rosewater, but it's hard to deny that he is in charge of some of these things. So I don't think this is a terrible tool for if you're just thinking about, maybe I could save this thing, and just wait till they make more of it. I want to make a vehicle deck. Are they gonna make more vehicles? Should I just wait a few months for them to make a gigantic vehicle set? If in the past few years, the answer would have been yes, right? And you can kind of look that up. So if you're interested in that, it's called the Storm Scale. And right now, I will look up the modal double-faced cards on the Storm Scale. And the number that is there is 5. So usually what's great about this is they've really referenced the blog posts where he'll say this, and often you can get a little more detail. So let's click that reference and see what happens. The question was, what are modal double-faced cards on the Storm Scale? Obviously, we'll continue seeing them in the next couple of sets, but how about after that? Mark Rosewater said, so far the audience has liked them. That plus the fact there's a lot of design possibilities bodes well for their return. I'd call them a 5 right now. and about a 5. The scale says there's like 500 annotations on this post, so give me a break. Level 5, we will need to find the right place to bring them back, but I'm optimistic. So they're probably going to come back. I mean, I think he hit the nail on the head when he said, from a design perspective, modal double face cards are a very powerful tool. So the odds that it would be advantageous for a developer trying to make the most use of all the design space they can, make new cards, really truly new cards, as often as they can, the odds that they will turn to modal double face cards to help them do that are, in my opinion, probably higher than a 5. The game designer in me says a 5 might be how you feel about the mechanic, but from a logistical perspective, the likelihood that you will turn back to this thing is higher than that. You see what I'm trying to say? All of this leads me to the conclusion that doing nothing with my Jumpstart stuff might be a pretty good approach right now. We don't know for sure they won't reprint the modal double face cards that I'm interested in, but there's also not a very good variety of them. Something that had tickled my pickle when I first looked at them is that if you look through all the land on one side, spell on the other cards that feel appropriate to Jumpstart, that aren't just terrible as well, the number of them that felt like they made any sense in the Jumpstart decks felt like not great. It's not like they would all have a different one, and I don't really like the idea of having them all the same one. I guess that's kind of elegant in its own way, like they all have literally the same one, but a lot of them maybe that wouldn't fit for a certain one. You could try to have them all have different ones, but we don't have much of a variety. So it's a little funky, you see. You could modify them in other ways, the packs. I've thought a little bit about making them simpler if it's intended to be a new player experience, but then why not just make there be less packs as well, so you have more control over what's there. Who is going to enjoy this? I, at the moment, have a little bit of a squeeze on how many people I can play this with that like it, and so I'm having a little bit of difficulty deciding where it should go in the world. I personally think that the basic rules of Magic are enough that it can be kind of fun, even if you have more simplistic gameplay. There's still interesting decisions to be made, especially when you don't entirely know what is in your deck. But I do think a lot of the things that make the game interesting, like really knowing what's in your deck, having some idea what's in your opponent's deck, there being a sort of direction to the gameplay, like you kind of know what each player is trying to do. The metagaming aspect, which my playgroup and I really enjoy, is a bit lost with Jumpstart. In its current form. I would be kind of interested to see what would happen, and this would take a huge amount of work, if you were to make like extremely sweaty from like a power level perspective, but very simple from like a mental real estate perspective, Jumpstart packs. So you'd probably have to make them totally from scratch, but I'm talking they have the power level is ridiculously high and probably hard to balance. And there's tons of counterplay and stuff, and you kind of know what they are. They could be archetypes that are kind of obvious, but they don't have a lot of basically just words on them. Like the cards are very simple but powerful is basically what I mean. You could argue that harkens back to earlier Magic, and I actually don't think it would be that hard to come up with a good number of them. I can already imagine the Snapcaster Mage Mono Blue Delver of Secrets pack, and you could do like a mono black one that had Necropotence and Dark Ritual, and these cards that in principle are pretty straightforward in what they do. Snapcaster and Necropotence have a decent amount of text, you could say, but what they do in practice is, I think, quite straightforward. And things like Dark Ritual, super blunt effect, counterspells, very blunt effect. Not things that are necessarily mechanically simple, but just that have an elegance to them, where the player, in my experience, the newer player, might still be able to enjoy them as something that they don't have to read much. They just might not know what counter means yet, and then you can experience that with them. And then as an experienced player, they can remember, oh yeah, this just counters a spell. Done. Like, that's what it does. And I think that essence of Magic is fun, and that could be a good place for it. A sort of earlier time in Magic's history experience. But that involves making all the packs from scratch. Well, pretty much anyway. I don't know. I really just don't know. I think if you played Magic all the time, like if I only played Magic for a living, I could definitely imagine it being fun making a pack from scratch or like modifying one maybe here and there, to fit my tastes and talk about the entire process. And that could be really interesting. I could imagine a whole channel where I do that. I could imagine a Kickstarter where we fund me doing a channel separately that is that thing 1 day a week for an entire year for like a couple $1,000 or something. That do you want that? Maybe I'll do. I might not hate doing that. I'd have to get a camera set up for it. I'm not promising we'll do that. But that would be fun. That fits my something about me is trying to get my work and play experience to help each other a little bit. That would be an example of that. That's something I would theoretically like to do, but it doesn't really make sense for me to do. How could I make it make sense for me to do it? That would be a way. You see what I mean? So yeah, I don't know. I did really enjoy in my building the set of commander decks. I have a couple that are adaptations in my style or our group's preferences of a pre-constructed deck. For example, I have Cadena Slinking Sorcerer. That's a green, blue, black morph deck that was sold as one of the pre-made decks that they sell every year, actually just all the time now. And I modified it to have no cards that make you shuffle, but etc. And, better cards to some extent. And it's pretty fun. It's very powerful for that level of deck, for something that isn't chasing competitive decks that doesn't cost a lot of money. It's very good. And I think it's fun to play. It's a little too good. It turns out there's quite a lot of morph creatures that have very good interactivity. Like they're basically a counterspell, but it's a morph creature. So you draw a card when you play them for free, and then you get a creature after you do the counterspell. It's a little, that's very, very strong. There's like almost 10 cards in that deck that are basically just that thing. Gives you a bit of a feeling of like, I put my trap card face down, and then your opponent tries to do like anything, and you've activated my trap card, big value, and then they die and yell Exodia, and it's great. But it's not that great. It's a little much. That deck is a really good example of the thing I talked about before, trying to keep the relative complexity down and embrace the parts of the game that are interesting complexity because of the combination of effects, not just overly complicated. I guess I should have said it that way before. It's not that I want everything to be really simple. That might sound boring to some of you, but we've all had experienced games of Magic. Well, if you've played a lot of Magic, experience level games of Magic where the cards being played were not complicated, but the game was deeply interesting because it was embracing that mechanical elegance a little bit, which you might think that's a little masturbatory of me. Why do I care so much about that? But I just do. I do. I don't know. I think that has value. I personally think it can be hard to see the mental strain or drain that less elegant mechanical presentation takes. And I think for a player like me that has little problem with that, it's even easier to look past games that have design that is needlessly complicated, basically, and say, oh, but it's just fine because like I can do that. And that's true, but I don't think that's a good way to share games with people. And you probably have heard me in the past actually make the argument that it's just unnecessarily worse. It's not bad. It's not actually a big deal, but it's just needlessly inferior to, this other form of more beautiful design, I guess. This is a weird philosophical streak in me that again, if you've watched or listened to a lot of me, you've heard me bring this up before. I just like that. I do think that has some value. I think that's an inclusive way to think about playing a multiplayer activity. I also think Magic is very capable of it. Like, I don't think there's a need not to have Magic include that. I think Magic does good at that sometimes. So I think that's about all I had to say. I know a lot of it wasn't directly about Jumpstart, but the last thing I had to say is I'm really excited to look more at the new Jumpstart 2022 thing that is like a bunch of different kinds of new packs. I just don't have a lot to say about that, but that's really cool. That's great. Optimistic about the future of Jumpstart. I hope the modal double face cards return and we get lands on the back so we can put them in more decks. It just occurs to me that's not really what the Stormscale thing was saying. It was just saying modal double face cards will return, but not necessarily with lands on the back. Anyway, I'll cut myself off here.